Okay, great. So welcome to the Columbus GreenSpot Conversations. It is a webinar series created by our GreenSpot Advisory Board to really dive into some of the sustainability issues that we have, really touch on a whole bunch of them. It kind of gives like maybe a 30,000 foot view, just enough to pique your interest that you can jump back in later on and do some more research and get more involved. If you want to know about our other upcoming GreenSpot conversations, make sure you're a member. You can join by going to columbusgreenspot.org. And we put them in our e-newsletter. And when you join, you're automatically enrolled in our e-newsletter. We also share them on a Facebook page and Twitter account, Columbus GreenSpot at both of those. So check that out. And a little bit about GreenSpot, although all of you all know about it, but we really try to inspire, educate, and recognize households, businesses, neighborhoods, community groups that adopt sustainable practices. And one thing about GreenSpot and really the city's sustainability efforts is we view it as kind of like three things going in the same direction to get sustainability. You have economy, environment, and equity. When you have those three things going forward, you really have sustainability and you really thrive as a community, and that's what we're really going for. I won't read all the numbers here on the slide, but you can see we have a lot of members and we have a lot of things that you can do to go green. One of those things is composting. That kind of brings us to today's topic. But before I do that, these are some of our GreenSpot member savings collectively in our GreenSpot universe. These are probably underreported because not all of our members report every little single thing that they do, but this gives you an idea of the impact that you might not think you're having, but when a whole bunch of people are doing it, it really does add up. So with that, I want to introduce our two speakers, our panelists today. Our first speaker is Amy Densborn. She is the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio's education specialist and is responsible for educating community members about the importance of waste reduction, reuse, and recycling, and safe disposal of the Franklin County Sanitary Landfill. Her passion for protecting the environment was spurred by her love for the outdoors and desire to protect Mother Earth for future generations. And she does, and I know she probably never gets tired of this joke, but she does more than just talk trash. So she enjoys growing her own food, reading and camping with her family. And welcome, Amy. Our second panelist is Sara Ernst, who is the Conservation Implementation Specialist at Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District, where she leads the backyard conservation programs with a focus on rain gardens and other stormwater management practices. Sara has worked as a field botanist in Florida and Pennsylvania. She's performed environmental education in various parts of Ohio and Central America and led several greater Cincinnati schools and communities in the installation of rain gardens. So welcome, Sara. All right, so let's get down to it. I'm going to change the slides here in a second, but most people probably don't realize what happens to that banana peel when they throw it in the trash. They probably think it magically disappears, but in fact it doesn't. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy here. Let me stop sharing my screen, and then we will get her presentation going here. Let's see, just a second. Okay, are you able to see that?
Looks great, Dave. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and Amy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dave, and good morning to everyone that is joining us today on a very rainy but relaxing morning. So as Dave mentioned, I work for the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio. You may know us as SWACO, much easier to say, and I do want to briefly provide an overview of what we do at SWACO. So we help manage the waste stream for Central Ohio, and we strive to make our region a leader in environmental sustainability by offering a range of diversion programming around recycling household hazardous waste, e-waste, your regular old recyclables in your household. We offer yard waste and other organic diversion programming. Right now, our community grants, our community waste reduction grant cycle is open. So if you have a waste reduction program or recycling program idea, and you're from a school, a nonprofit, or from a community here in Central Ohio, please reach out to us. We would love to have a conversation with you. And then we also offer landfill tours and recycling talks for the youth and for adults to learn more about the importance of waste diversion. I encourage you to check out more about SWACO at swaco.org. Next slide, Dave. So really what is fantastic about our community is that we're doing an outstanding job at diverting waste from the Franklin County Sanitary Landfill. So we have a diversion rate here in our community of about 50%, and that the national average is right around 34%. So we're doing an outstanding job, but there's always room for improvement. Next slide. Because as a community, we do still send approximately 1 million tons of wasted materials to the Franklin County Sanitary every year, sanitary landfill every year. Next slide. And the reason why I call it wasted materials is a lot of the material that makes its way to the landfill, it had the potential to be reused, recycled, or composted. And so 76% of the materials that we receive at the landfill, they really truly don't belong there. They could have been recovered and turned into a benefit for our community. The number one type of material that the landfill receives by weight is food scraps or food waste. So that's equal to about 1 million pounds of food waste that we receive every single day. So we have an amazing opportunity to increase recovery of this food waste, get it into the hands of hungry members of our community, and if we can't recover it, turn it into nutrient-rich compost. Next slide. So food waste is a growing concern in Central Ohio, but it's also a growing concern across the nation. In the United States, the USDA estimates that as much as 40% of all the food that is grown or produced is wasted. So you're seeing more and more food initiatives that are attracting funding, innovation, and media attention. And we are one of them here in Central Ohio. We are working on the cutting edge of food waste prevention. So as we learned, food waste is one of the most common materials tossed away in our trash cans that make their way to the landfill. All that material adds up to each of us tossing out about a pound of food waste every day. I know that's hard to imagine, but we can change that. We have the power to all make a lasting impact. So wasting food also hurts the environment. So a lot of people have this conception that I'll put my banana peel, I'll throw my onions in the trash can, it will decompose in the landfill. Unfortunately, that's not how landfills are designed. Landfills are designed to be anaerobic. You starve them of oxygen and sunlight. Materials essentially are just entombed or encapsulated, and that material starts to produce greenhouse gases once it slowly starts to break down. And so SWACO does have a gas management system in place to help mitigate releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but it's always preferred if it's food that can be saved and rescued and into the hands of hungry members of our community, that we do that first. And then if we cannot salvage the food, we turn it into compost. So when food is landfilled instead of eaten, we lose all the natural resources that went into producing it, the money that went into it, and the opportunity to feed the food insecure. And there's a few stats there on the slide for you, just to really let some of that sink in terms of how many resources are wasted when we throw our food away in the trash. So you are in an important position to make a measurable difference and lead our community towards a more sustainable future by preventing and reducing the amount of food waste that you create. So SWACO has set a goal of helping Franklin County reach a 75% diversion rate by 2032. We cannot do this alone. We need everyone's help. So please spread the word about the importance of diverting waste and turning it into a resource that benefits the community and the economy. So what can you do at home? How can you get involved? The Save More Than Food awareness campaign can be found at SaveMoreThanFood.org. This is really an awareness campaign to teach people how to reduce their food waste at home, at school, and at work. This resource has different tips, prevention tips, recipes, storage guides, and connections to local workshops for composting at home, and even more, which we're going to learn more about composting with Sara here shortly. So I wanted to provide a couple quick tips for you, so you can start implementing these prevention tips today. When you go to the grocery store, these are all found on SaveMoreThanFood.org. Shop smart. Make that list. I think my parents ingrained this in me as a young girl, that you don't just go to the store and walk around, because you'll probably buy more than you need, right? Make that list. Try to shop smartly. Try to plan out your meals as much as you can for the week, and think about how much food you might need, and try not to overbuy. You also want to store your food properly. So not all foods are stored in the same exact way. So it really can make a difference in the lifespan of the food just by checking to see how it should be stored. So for example, when you buy meat, you're not sure you're going to eat it that week, put it in the freezer. That'll make sure that your meat stays nice and stays frozen and it's safe. And then when you're ready to eat it, you can pull it out. And you can also almost freeze anything. So you really don't want to freeze eggshells and canned foods, but almost everything else can be placed in the freezer and then pulled out at another time. Even your bread. I know at my house, if we ever buy bread from the store, we take half of it, we put it in the freezer, because we know we're not going to eat it before it goes bad. And then we'll just eat that half of the loaf in the cupboard. And then when we're done with that half loaf, pull out the other half that's in the freezer. And then the other last tip for preventing food waste is really to learn more about the date labels. It's really confusing, right? The best by, the used by, the expires on. The food waste focused nonprofit Refed, they are working on developing better labels. And they estimate that as much as 20% of consumer food waste causes confusion on these labels. So it's no wonder we're all sitting here wondering, like, should I even listen to this? So, try to use your common sense. If it's got mold on it, if it smells bad, visual cues that would help you determine whether or not your food is safe to eat. Just use your common sense when it comes to food. All right, and then we also have, recovering. So we talked about freezing your leftover. We talked about freezing your food. You could also freeze your leftovers. If you made a big batch of soup, big pasta casserole dish. You're not going to be able to eat that all in the week's time and put it in the fridge. Throw half of it in the freezer. Put a label on it with the date. Your future self will thank you for the work that you expended on that meal, and you can just pull it out, take it with you to work. And it's an easy zero waste meal that you can enjoy. And then, reimagining your aging ingredients. So I know a big thing in our house is to just kind of throw it all in a pot and see what we make. After, holiday dinners, Thanksgiving, you have some random leftover ingredients in your fridge. You're just really not sure what to do with them. There's a resource out there. It's called allrecipes.com. And they have a plethora of choices and recipes for you to choose from. Type in your ingredients that you have, and something really cool and creative will pop up for you to make use of your random ingredients that are in your fridge. And then, we're not going to talk about this too much, but, not all food waste can be avoided. So, for example, you're not going to eat the watermelon rinds or the avocado pit when you're having your fruits and vegetables. And so that material can still be diverted from the landfill and can be made into something beneficial for the planet. So, there's a growing number of communities in Central Ohio that have launched community drop-off programs. So there are 7 different communities here in Central Ohio. I'll name them really quickly. All this information can be found on SaveMoreThanFood.org. The 7 communities that have a drop-off currently, Bexley, Dublin, Grandview Heights, Grove City, Hilliard, Upper Arlington, Westerville, and Worthington. So if you live in one of those communities, I encourage you to reach out to your local service department to see how you can get involved composting your food scraps. And then backyard composting is great for the whole family. Get the kids involved, whatever system that you want to do, a tumbler versus a pile versus a vermi-composting bin with worms. There's many different options to choose out there to fit what, to figure out what fits best for your family, the amount of organic waste that you generate at your house. And then lastly, there are different services out there that you can pay for to actually have your compost either picked up curbside or take it to a local drop-off spot. So we have 3 haulers here in Central Ohio. We have Go Zero Services, Compost Exchange, and Kids That Compost. All 3 of these are great haulers. They provide a great service to the community. I encourage you to check those out if you're interested in composting even beyond your backyard, so you can do meat and dairy and things that we typically should avoid composting at our own at-home compost bin. All right, so that concludes my portion. So I want everyone to start the conversation with friends and family about the small steps that we can all take to help reduce food waste. Together, each one of us can make a difference.
Great, thank you, Amy. You know, one of the tips that I learned from you all, which I try to do, but just keeping a marker by the fridge. And so when I open up that salad dressing, or I open up that spaghetti sauce, I can just write the date that I open it, because yeah, otherwise there's no way I'm going to remember. And then I do the psych test as I get older. You know, sometimes that might not work so well. I do the sniff test, and it's like, am I freaking myself out? Is there something that, so the marker is just an easy way to be like, all right, I opened this yesterday. You know, it's still good. So I know we have a question, but please write your questions in the chat. For those folks that are on Facebook watching this, feel free to write. I think I'll be able to see your comments in there, but go ahead and write any questions in there. We will get to them at the end. So with that, I do want to turn it over to Sara. And let's see here. Are you able to see the screen? Awesome. Well, Sara, take it away.
Hi, good morning, Dave. Good morning, Amy. Amy, I learned a lot from you just now. I just wanted to chime in and say that I did not know until recently that I could freeze my milk. So I buy milk in gallons. I don't drink it very quickly. And the unused portion I put in a glass jar. I don't fill it to the top, and I stick it in the fridge. It's great. And she approves of that. Wonderful. So I'm going to introduce the audience to the basics of backyard composting. Many of you probably already know it, but if you did not, we partner with SWACO and the City of Columbus to offer a rebate on compost bins. So that is certainly an additional incentive. Let's go ahead, Dave. So composting is simply the acceleration of the natural decomposition process. And there are a few definitions that'll pop up here on the screen if you advance, Dave. This was, obviously intended for a live audience, but what you're doing is you're accelerating an already natural process by controlling the kinds of materials that are going into the compost bin, and to some extent you can control the temperature and the timing of that as well. So continue to advance there, Dave, and you'll see a couple more definitions here. Just pick one of these that you enjoy the most. And as you can see, Cornell, the Rodale School, or the Book of Composting, Let It Rot, all of these are also really good resources for you to go and learn more. So many benefits of composting here. It tends to buffer the pH so that some of your plants aren't as picky or as dependent on a specific pH to release some of their nutrients. Early compost tends to provide a more acidic environment, while late stage or cured compost will give you that more of a neutral pH, which is what plants tend to prefer. It protects your plants against bacteria and harmful microorganisms. The big one here at Franklin Soil and Water, and what we are after and why we promote composting, is that it retains water in your soil and for your plants better, and it prevents polluted runoff. And it does wonders for drainage, particularly here in central Ohio. And in many parts of Ohio, we have very hard, dense clay soil. So working in compost once or twice a year can really work wonders. And improving your soil environment is a way to get around having to use fertilizers or pesticides. So again, you're really protecting the plant and inoculating it. And of course, as Amy mentioned, it greatly can reduce our food and yard waste and put those things to good use. And you know, compost at the end of the day is not a fertilizer. It provides the big three, the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, but also provides a lot of essential micronutrients that your plants will want in smaller quantities over time. Go ahead. So this is something we definitely don't want to see. It's often regarded as, well, this is natural. It's part of the woods, part of the environment. But this sort of thing in large quantities releases nutrients very quickly into aquatic environments in particular, which can lead to fish kills and harmful algal outbreaks. So despite the fact that this may appear natural to you, try to compost this on your lawn or put it in those yard waste bags. Keep it out of streams and creeks. So this is not the right way to compost. Certainly, if you throw that apple core in the corner of the yard, yeah, it'll eventually break down, but can we do that better? Certainly. So the four things that a compost pile needs are carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and moisture. So carbons are going to be the tough, dry materials that you see in that top row. So leaves, wood chips, paper, and straw or hay. Actually, hay, I think, would be the bale that you see there, and straw would be the greener counterpart that would provide the nitrogen. So the nitrogen stuff is the stuff that's all stinky. So like your weed, your home scraps, coffee grounds, as you probably know, grass clippings, and that sort of thing. So we've got the carbon and we've got the nitrogen there. Go ahead, Dave. And a more extensive list for you here. Many people are surprised about the sheer quantity of materials that you can, in fact, compost. And a compost pile is like your nutrition. So the more diverse it is, the more benefits you're going to get out of that at the end of the day. I will note that, some things like sawdust or wood chips or newspaper, that stuff, if you think about it, is very, very highly processed. So it's going to take a long time to break down and require more of that green material to feed the microorganisms that can then enable them to break down that carbon. And they're also just not particularly that high in usable content. So if you have to use those things, do so in a limited quantity and be aware that it might take a while for them to break down. So some popular options, obviously most people have kitchen scraps available to them year round. Leaves are a wonderful counterpart, particularly in the fall. If you begin to get really excited about composting, you'll drive around the neighborhood and make your significant other pick up yard waste bags and then store them. I recommend this. It can really strengthen a relationship. But certainly you want to avoid meat and dairy, fats and oils. These things, probably technically they can be composted in a commercial facility. That is done safely and efficiently, but in a home compost pile, it's more than likely to attract rodents and critters and to smell and putrefy. So to avoid those things, go ahead, Dave. So the art of composting is, it's an art and a science here, and you will see most of these animals are macroscopic animals, and these are going to populate your compost pile when it's cooler and towards the edges of the compost pile. And as your compost pile starts to heat up, that's the work of microscopic bacteria and fungi. And those are going to do the lion's share of the work. It's really fascinating. And actually the energy that they produce is that heat that your compost pile produces. So it's a really fascinating food web. So you may hear the appropriate ratio of that carbon to nitrogen, or the brown stuff to the green stuff, is 30:1. So how do you get there? There are all kinds of tables and references online. Just to give you a snapshot of some more popular options here, you can see, food scraps and grass give you about a 15:19 ratio. And you may have heard things like manure, chicken waste and stuff like that, it might burn your plants, and that's because of that really high nitrogen content. And check out some of the materials circled there in the brown. Paper is particularly high, and so is straw. So again, the more of those carbon-rich materials you add, you will have to counter that with very heavy nitrogen-rich materials. So the green material will, again, really speed up the nitrogen cooking process, but too much of it can really produce an anaerobic, stinky pile that is just kind of drippy and gross, and you certainly don't want to hang out near it. Too many brown materials mean that your pile is not going to break down, or it won't break down quickly over time. Go ahead. There are some really fancy calculators online. If you're trying to get to that magic ratio, for those of you who really want to control the process of composting, you can get a compost material in about 30 days, but most people will tend to lengthen that to 3 to 6 months. So if you can advance, Dave, you will see that this brings up the general quantity of the ratio there. You can add how much material you have, how much does it weigh, what is the perfect material to get you to that right carbon to nitrogen material. Most people don't get this scientific. In general, I would say, you can add equal parts brown to green. Go ahead, Dave. If you want a faster compost pile and you're willing to have it, maybe be a little stinky for a little while, but you can add more green than brown. So this will be just a little visual on is it green or is it brown? So this is going to be straw or hay there at the bottom. And again, the hay is going to be the finished product. The straw would not. We've got Goofy up there with some vegetables that are very high in nitrogen. This little kid has a wagon full of hearts. If they're human hearts, they're going to be high in nitrogen. I'm hoping these are paper hearts, so that's going to be high in carbon. Sorry, it's a little macabre for this this Wednesday morning. Again, we've got plants over there. Those can be tossed into your compost pile. They're high in nitrogen. You want to avoid weeds and weed seeds because generally your home compost pile does not get hot enough to kill the weed seeds unless you control it very carefully by taking its temperature. Go ahead. All right, leaves are a wonderful, wonderful source of carbon, particularly in the fall. If you can shred these things up, they will be better for you and they will break down more quickly. Ultimately, you want your compost pile to be more homogeneous in nature. We've got a hippo and a zebra there. I think that's very, very high in nitrogen. Again, you probably don't want to compost these things in your home compost pile, but in a commercial composting facility, yes, of course, these things break down. And of course, newspaper. Limited quantity is best here. And certainly shred when you can. And money. Of course, I have so much money that I am always composting my money. Okay, so a little bit more about the appropriate ratios here. So we've got our nitrogen, and go ahead, Dave, keep advancing. So this is going to be 3 parts brown to 1 part green. And these things at the end of the day will probably weigh about the same. You can do a 1-to-1 ratio. You can layer or you can toss the materials. Again, it just depends on how carefully you want to manage your compost pile. If you have a high quantity of nitrogen-rich materials like manure or like just a pile of grass clippings, your compost pile might get too hot, in which case you can actually kill the beneficial bacteria. You can buy a compost thermometer. They're just an extremely long thermometer. You will see at the beginning of your composting process, you will have a cool pile, and then it heats up pretty quickly, and then it starts to fall. If you are carefully managing your pile and you're going to be applying it to your food crops and to your edible garden, and you are using things like manures or say you tried to compost a tomato plant that had blight or something like that, you want to make sure it gets to 130 degrees for at least 15 days. It doesn't have to be 15 consecutive days, but at least 15 days. And you're going to have to rotate that and make sure the stuff on the outside sits on the inside for a few days. You can turn it whenever the temperature drops below 100 degrees. Every 6 weeks to 3 months is okay. And compost animals are comfortable between 90 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit or so. So how big should it be? About the size of a cubic yard. So that's the size of a washer or a dryer or a dishwasher, something like that, about 3 by 3 by 3. And that's going to mean that it is able to retain its own heat and that you can manage it carefully by turning it. Any larger than that, go ahead and advance it. And it gets a little trickier to get the air to penetrate that pile. And remember, that's one of the things that the microbes need. That oxygen, there's many great ways to get oxygen into your pile. You can see this photo there of a PVC pipe with holes in it that's just shoved into the compost pile. That's a great way to introduce some air into the middle. You can buy little aerators like the tool that you see on the left to penetrate your pile and then turn within it. And of course, you can toss your compost pile. You may have seen the 3-bin system. So when you want to turn it, you can turn it into bin number 2 and cure it in bin number 3. Go ahead, Dave. You can also add coarse layers to the bottom of the pile. If you have any large sticks or maybe not limbs, but just incorporate those as a layer at the very bottom of your compost pile, or whenever is handy. Just know that they'll take a little longer to break down, but they do a really important job of letting air into there. So compost piles also need moisture. Rainwater is best. So like a day-to-day when it's raining gently, take the lid off that compost pile and turn it a few times to let the rainwater penetrate. The compost piles and microorganisms prefer that, the soft rainwater as opposed to mineral-rich municipal water. Okay, a little bit about rodent-proofing. So things to avoid, I mentioned earlier, are meats and oils and grease and poo, including your cat poo and your dog poo. We don't exactly know what's in their food. We don't know what comes out the other end. So to be extra safe, avoid poo, and you don't want to attract other animals as well. Layer your composts and cover it. Sometimes your food scraps will fall to the outside. If you're managing it carefully, make sure you incorporate those materials back to the inside of the pile so that they will break down more quickly. And if you are turning your compost pile or moving it regularly, you will disturb any propensity for these animals to want to burrow or create nests or to start families in there. So place the bin away from other rodent food sources and housing, such as sheds or garages, things like that. But also place it close enough to you where you know you're going to take your food scraps out to your compost bin. And cover those air vents with a wire mesh, like chicken wire or something like that. and keep the lid on there. The lid obviously prevents rodents from getting into your pile, but it also preserves that heat, and it prevents the rainfall from really soaking through your compost pile and washing out some of those nutrients that you're trying to preserve. So if you do go and get the rebate through Franklin Soil and Water, we actually require that you demonstrate that your compost bin is rodent proof. And these are some of the things that we recommend to you. So use the mesh, put it on top of a pallet or on top of you know, a piece of concrete or cement. You can dig out the soil and put some hardware cloth below your compost bin. And of course, you can use that rotating above ground drum. And those in and of themselves do have some drawbacks, but one of the benefits is that they're pretty rodent proof. Different kinds of composting systems and units out there. So we'll just talk briefly about the benefits and advantages and disadvantages of these. That wire mesh system up there is not going to hold heat very well, and it looks kind of messy. You know, I can imagine that being very popular with some different kinds of animals, but obviously low cost, do it yourself. Wooden bins, if you have room, can provide storage capacity and somewhere for you to toss the compost to ensure that it's finished, or to ensure that you continue to move it. Cinder blocks, again, only if you've got space, and how easily will you be able to toss that pile in there. It looks rather large. Rotating drums, we talked about these briefly. The big disadvantage to these that I interpret is that you kind of have to have the perfect ratio of your browns and your greens at once. So you can add it in there and just leave it alone, turn it every now and again, but it's not the sort of system where you want to continuously add material, because then your compost will not be, you know, cured. It'll just continue to want to compost. And you don't want to add unfinished compost to your garden beds. You might also take care to introduce some inoculant into your rotating drum, because it doesn't sit on the ground where the microbes live, like that plastic on the ground bin there to the right, to the center. So add a scoop of nice garden soil or compost to your rotating drum. That'll help kickstart the process. And bokashi is a kind of fermenting, and I've seen just a handful of these systems out there, but you can really ferment almost anything, including meat, including bones, and then you might take that material and then add that to your compost pile to finish it off. So that's a pretty interesting thing. So how do you know when it's done? So you don't want to recognize the original materials that you've added to your compost bin, with the exception of things like avocado pits or eggshells. Those things are, you know, usually going to take a while, and they aren't particularly harmful. But you want to have a nice earthy, humusy, somewhat spongy material that's homogeneous in nature. It doesn't heat up anymore, smells nice, it doesn't stink, crumbly, dark brown. Good compost is like all of the food in your fridge. You have to use it or lose it, because it has, you know, it's packed full of microorganisms and nutrients. And if it is let to sit for a while, some of those things will, you know, eventually migrate away from the pile. The microorganisms, that rich nitrogen will eventually evaporate and dry. So try to use it at least twice a year. So how to use it? Incorporate it into the garden soil. You can gently do this with a pitchfork or a turning fork. Side dressing throughout the growing season. You can work it into the soil. You can also use it on top of the soil. You can use it to start your seedlings. This is really important to use only your finished compost. If it has some of the carbon-rich materials still hanging out, like paper or cardboard, the microorganisms and the fungi will want to use that nitrogen to then break down that carbon, and that nitrogen is what your plants need to grow. So be a little bit careful there. And you can also use it as a top dressing to improve your lawn, to increase the organic matter and the water, the water holding capacity of your turf. Okay, so I have some quiz questions to end the presentation. So why is composting like wildlife management? Go ahead and advance, Dave. You're managing the habitat of millions of animals, which are the decomposers. How do I decide what to put in my compost bins? I'm waiting for the audience poll here, but I'm imagining that you mix your browns and your greens. Help, my compost reeks of ammonia. What do I do? Should I give up? Should I move? Should I clean my floors? Should I add more brown material? Yes, that's what you should do. And again, your compost smells like rotten eggs, very sulfur heavy. Should you make egg salad? Should you spray it with perfume? Should you add a dry, coarse material to introduce more air? Bingo. I want a hot compost. So you're actively managing your compost. You want compost within a month to 3 months. How big do you make it? The answer here is D, at least 1 cubic yard. No smaller and no larger than that is ideal. And that is all for me.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I do have to say, Goofy needs a talking to. He's about to compost all those like really good-looking fruits, so we'll have to talk to him afterwards. So if you have any questions, we do have some that I'm going to get to here. And actually, let me. So can you address the pros and cons of different plastic composter models, shapes, and sizes, which I think, Sarah, you kind of covered. For example, this person's round rotating composter doesn't seem to allow air in because it's supposed to be rat proof. Can you remind her, like, what are some things that she can do in that situation?
Well, I'm wondering if the rotating drum has air vents on the side or holes or anything like that. I don't recall off the top of my head if they do typically, but if they don't, you know, slide that door over every now and again and just rotate the drum more frequently if you can. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the other possibility is to maybe take your little garden shovel, like the small one, I forget what they call that one, but or an aerator, and just kind of manually get the air in there as much as you can if you don't feel like the holes on the side of the tumbler are adequate for allowing air to come in.
Great. Another question is, does SWACO have plans to provide composting to Clintonville/Columbus City?
That's a great question. And you know, we have a lot of plans for the future in terms of diverting food scraps and making composting efficient and convenient for everybody. I can't tell you exactly what the timeline is for that, but it is something that we are working with. If you know of someone in the city of Clintonville or the city of Columbus who's interested in applying for a grant that I mentioned earlier, the Community Waste Reduction Grant Cycle is open right now. We do provide funding for communities to implement a food waste drop-off program. So that might be something that you want to look into.
Cool. I know that the city's Division of Refuse has composting on their radar. It's something they're aware of with that. So another question is, when you talk about paper, what do you mean? You talk about newspaper, white copy paper?
Newspaper, copy paper, magazines, that sort of thing. All those are acceptable. There used to be a concern with toxic metals and inks used on paper materials, and I think that is no longer a concern. I think most of that ink is soy-based and it's safe to compost. And you know, those sorts of things, they tend to break down pretty rapidly in compost piles. One thing I neglected to mention is that you ought to be careful about collecting yard waste because you're not sure that it has been treated with pesticides or herbicides. Most of that, I believe, is rendered inert over time. But if you're using that, or manure, if you're using that on your edible plants, just be a little bit more mindful and ask questions about its origin. And with those printed materials, just use them, you know, not in abundance, I would say, because again, they're very, very high in carbon. So it's just going to take a while to break down. If you do have a bunch of it, you know, make sure to layer that with your nitrogen-rich materials and turn your compost more frequently. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I do shred, I shred my documents at home, and I put my shredded paper in my compost bin, and I just try to do it sparingly. You know, if I put it in, I only put in a couple handfuls at a time. I don't put the entire bin of shredded paper in, right? And I find it breaks down pretty quickly. So layering is always helpful, and that also helps keep smells down.
Awesome. I think that's just about all the questions that that we have that I see. I do want to thank Amy and Sarah for taking the time out of their day to present on turning your scraps into garden gold. I also want to give a plug for the next GreenSpot conversation, which will be next Tuesday. It's Growing Gardens, Growing Community. We'll have Julia Lynn Walker, who's with the Brownsville Growers Market, as well as the Brownsville Agri Academy. So you can go to the GreenSpot Facebook page, events, and you'll see where you can sign up for that to get the special code, so you're able to join us. And as you know, we have started sharing on Facebook, doing the live stream, so we got that going as well. So I want to thank everybody and hope everybody has a nice green 4th of July and enjoy the weekend. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.